All right, it is the B Block Podcast. I am your host, Brandon Scott. I appreciate you for joining me. Got a couple of Texans news items that I want to get to, quite a few actually. And I did say on the last episode that we wouldn't be like knee deep into Texans offseason stuff. But since the NFL season is technically still going, you got the Super Bowl coming up in a couple of Sundays. You're hearing about, you know, interviews, right? Coaching interviews, GM interviews, guys getting named to the Pro Bowl as alternates, all of that sort of stuff. So I want to get into a few of those things. I got some thoughts on some of the news items that we've gotten, but I actually want to start here with Kamari Lassiter and Calen Bullock being named to the Pro Bowl. They became Pro Bowlers in their second year here. And I understand that the Pro Bowl has become somewhat watered down. It is not the same. It doesn't carry the same sort of cachet that it once did. And the ultimate honor, individual honor that is for a player would be named to an all pro team. But I think that this Pro Bowl selection, even as alternates, is a little different from that. It doesn't, to me, this is not an example of, oh, the Pro Bowl is watered down. You got guys getting in there that otherwise wouldn't and don't necessarily belong there. And you could say I'm a little bit close to it, that maybe I'm a little bit biased because I do get to watch Kamari Lassiter and Calen Bullock up close. And Texans fans, I would imagine, are protective of their own guys as well. So a lot of the people that are listening or watching this podcast probably feel the same way for those reasons. But I do think that Lassiter and Bullock are not only worthy of the Pro Bowl recognition, but what I really want to point out is that the two of them had really good rookie seasons that were worth celebrating, and to me showed that they were on this type of trajectory to begin with, right? Like I think that you probably read, or at least I'll remind you of Jonathan Alexander at the Houston Chronicle writing about the two of them feeling a little bit slighted last year for not being considered for NFL Rookie Defensive Player of the Year, right? They were behind a couple of other defensive backs that were picked ahead of them, right? You had the Eagles cornerbacks, Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. You had Jarrett Verse from the Rams. You had Braden Fisk also from the Rams. And Chop Robinson, I think, were the guys who were finalists for Defensive Player of the Year. And you had neither Kamari Lassiter nor Calen Bullock recognized with that group. And I think they took that personally, even though I think those guys that I just mentioned were worth the consideration and had worthwhile rookie years. If I'm Lassiter or Bullock, I definitely look at that and think, hey, I had a pretty good rookie year as well. You know, how many Calen Bullock had something like 5 interceptions. Yeah, he had 5 interceptions his rookie year. I think Lassiter had 3. So, and he was already being considered one of the more physical cornerbacks in the league as a rookie. So I thought they had rookie seasons that were worth celebrating. Not quite necessarily Pro Bowl level, but definitely promising for what they gave you, and to me showed that they were on this trajectory. They were immediate impact players. Bullock as a third rounder. You had, of course, Lassiter as a second rounder. These are some numbers for them. As I mentioned, the 5 interceptions last season for Bullock had the fourth lowest passer rating. This is also from Jonathan Alexander. He mentioned this, citing some next gen stats. The fourth lowest passer rating allowed by both corners and safeties. That was his rookie year, Calen Bullock. Lassiter, along with his 3 interceptions, allowed the lowest completion percentage among cornerbacks who face at least 30 targets. The lowest, and I know we get a lot of stats out there with the advanced stats, and you hear a lot of, especially on broadcast, this is the first left-handed guy to do this on his birthday, all kind of like ridiculous stuff. But I think this is pretty good. The lowest completion percentage among cornerbacks who face 30 targets. That was last year as rookies. And even going into the season, they were calling it the best defensive back room in the NFL. I think they were doing that maybe even before it was actually true or clearly true. But then this year happens, and both of those guys get 4 interceptions. They're 2 of 4 guys who got 4 interceptions. And only one of those 4 guys, that being Jalen Petrie, has not been either named to at least a Pro Bowl or All Pro in the sense of, or in the case of Derek Stingley Jr. So between the two of them, over their first 2 seasons, and this is why I really wanted to recognize them. Over their first 2 seasons, they have a combined, Kamari Lassiter and Calen Bullock have a combined 16 interceptions. 9 for Bullock, 7 for Lassiter. So I think this is something, first of all, credit to them for like being immediate impact players the way that they were, or in the way that they have been. And I think this is also something that the general manager can really hang his hat on, Nick Caserio. Like, you think about what they've done with this defense, okay? Caserio drafts Derek Stingley Jr., he drafts Jalen Petrie, he drafts Kamari Lassiter, Calen Bullock, of course, Will Anderson Jr. in between that, and we understand and know what all they gave up to get him. That's 5 Pro Bowl level players over the course of 3 drafts that they bring in here. And I know Jalen Petrie hasn't been named to one, but I think it's fair to say that Jalen Petrie is the type of football player that most would want on their defense. Like, if you're building a defense, you want to insert a Jalen Petrie like player, and that really goes for all of these guys that I mentioned, to be honest. But I mentioned Jalen there because he has not been recognized in the way that these other guys have. And even he is somebody who's earned a second contract. That's somebody that they paid over the offseason, recognizing his importance to the team. So, and then on top of that, Caserio's obviously signed Daniil Hunter and Azeez Al-Shaair, who's the leader of their defense. He's done that within that time. Now, I understand that DeMeco Ryans, as a defensive coach, you want to give him credit for all of the defensive players, for all of the defensive production. But I do want to recognize this is like a team effort over the years, right? And a couple of those guys, or at least, a couple of those guys they drafted before DeMeco even got here, in the case of Derek Stingley and Jalen Petrie, DeMeco didn't do it alone. I think he, along with Caserio, deserve a lot of credit for how they've put this defense together. And I think it's a phenomenal job that they've done. Those 2 guys being recognized as Pro Bowlers in their second year, to me, is evidence of that. Now, since I spent some time there giving them their flowers, and Lassiter and Bullock deserve their flowers, full stop. But when it comes to the general manager, when it comes to putting the team together, when it comes to celebrating team building and talent recognition, okay, to me, this also highlights how they've fallen short offensively when it comes to drafting specifically. They have not been able to replicate this on the other side of the ball. Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel, hopefully they take the year 2 leap that Lassiter and Bullock just did, and I think that they can. I respect the contribution that they made this season, even though I think a lot of people feel like they could have been utilized more and perhaps more earlier. Maybe some of those Justin Watson targets could have been Jaden Higgins targets. Maybe some of the early Christian Kirk stuff should have been Jalen Noel stuff. I think there's a reason why it wasn't. But those are guys that are promising, at least. Ariante Ursary, the left tackle. That should be a good player for him. Ariante Ursary, I think, is a good draft pick. That's their left tackle of the future, it appears. But then it's these interior spots that we talk about all the time where they can't seem to figure it out. Kenyon Green and Juice Scruggs. Those are the ones that stand out. Blake Fisher, of course, is a tackle that they picked in the 2nd round, and it looks like he's probably a backup right now, or somebody that you use for specialized formations, for the 6-man formation, 6 offensive line formation. But the offensive line, while it was better this season because of how it was coached and the players gave their best and all of that kind of stuff, I do think that it's on Casario to find the impact players on the offensive line and within the offense the way he's been able to do with the defense. And they have not had that. The imbalance of a recognition and what you've seen on the defensive side of the ball versus what you've seen on the offensive ball, I think further illustrates that, further drives that point home as far as I'm concerned. How many so we just recognized Will Anderson Jr., Derek Stingley Jr., Calen Bullock, Kamari Lassiter, and then let's just even throw Jalen Petrie in there as a fifth Pro Bowl level player who has not actually been named to a Pro Bowl. That's 4 to 5 guys that they've drafted that are either Pro Bowl or Pro Bowl level players. Who are the Pro Bowl or Pro Bowl level players that the Texans have drafted? I'll wait. I'll wait. It's rookie year CJ Stroud and it's Nico Collins. That's it, right? That's it. The other Pro Bowlers that you would point out would be Joe Mixon, who was, who was brought over. Of course, Laramie Tunsil, who was brought over. So like guys that you traded for and gave money to, along with two of those, and just 2 guys that you've drafted, and one of them is C.J. Stroud, who objectively is going into this season with a lot to prove. Even if you're somebody that believes in C.J. Stroud, and I consider myself to be one of those people, but objectively speaking, is somebody that's going into this season with a lot to prove. Where are the offensive linemen, Pro Bowl offensive linemen that they've drafted? Maybe Ariante Ursary is going to become that guy. Maybe. Titus Howard was drafted by a different regime, and he's somebody that they've had to, unfortunately, been able to move around the offensive line, but has turned into more of a Swiss Army knife for them than, let's say, a Pro Bowl caliber player, because he just can't play at one position for long enough to be a Pro Bowl. Even if he is, C.J. Stroud talked about him, feeling like he was playing at that level at all of the positions that he played. Of course, he's going to say that about his guy, but he don't play no position long enough to even be considered a Pro Bowl level player. You don't know where he's playing on a given week if you don't follow them day to day. So think about that. 4 to 5 guys drafted within 3 drafts that are either all pro, Pro Bowl, or Pro Bowl level. 4 to 5 of them. On the offensive side, you got 2, and then a couple of maybes in Ariante Ursary and Jaden Higgins. Nothing on the interior. So that stands out to me. Not to be the Debbie Downer, and I did spend the first 8 minutes praising them for what they've done on the defensive side. That is why we saw the historic defense that we saw this year. But that part to me is worth exploring, of like, hey, can we get some kind of, I'm not saying be lesser on the defensive side, but we got to pick it up. We see what the potential is, what you can do when you scout well, when you draft well, that sort of thing. When you put them in the right positions. So all of that stands out to me. Okay, so the other news items that I wanted to hit. You got Brian Daboll becoming the Titans' next offensive coordinator. This one is like interested to me and I know I'm sitting up here. If you're watching on YouTube, I'm sitting up here you might think I'm conflicted because I'm sitting up here in a Houston Oilers starter jacket. I am not one of those people that like gets all hung up about the Titans being the Oilers and the Oilers being the Titans. Houston is Houston to me, so the Oilers belong to Houston and the Titans belong to Tennessee, even though they are technically the same thing. So wanted to go ahead and just explain that on the front end. I'm not, I'm not conflicted, not even one bit here. But I am intrigued by what the Titans are doing. Because now Cam Ward going into his second season, he gets Robert Saleh as his head coach, and he gets Brian Daboll as his OC. This is interesting for Saleh because I don't think he ever really had a quarterback. Right by the time he ended up having Aaron Rodgers, it feels like Aaron Rodgers had already been hurt. Like he got hurt that first year they were together, and it just never. And then they had the issues with their offensive coordinator, and that just never really got rolling for a number of reasons. He's never really had a fair shot at a quarterback, Robert Saleh. He's got that, it seems like, with Cam Ward. And then from Cam Ward's side, he's got a legitimate head coach and a legitimate play caller. I think that's a much better situation for Cam Ward in Tennessee. So that makes them a lot more interesting for me to watch. The general manager there, Mike Borgonzi, he's going into his second year there now. He's going into his second year after taking over for Rand Carthon. And there's not a lot to make from a GM after his first year, especially if you're not every day following it, right? Like if you're not there to follow it every day up close, and I'm not, then it's hard to really evaluate or really get a great beat on how a general manager is doing after just year one. But then let's see what that looks like within the division here, what that looks like with a second year GM and quarterback paired with what we think is a more credible head coach and play caller in Robert Saleh and Brian Daboll. So that's interesting news to me. James Liipfert, the assistant general manager for the Texans, is a finalist for the Falcons job, doing his second in-person interview in Atlanta. That's supposed to happen later this week, according to Ian Rappaport. And I just think that that is noteworthy, kind of going back to our earlier conversation about the players that they've drafted, that they've scouted and drafted, because Liipfert is the ultimate scout turn GM guy. Like what is your, when you think about what is a GM's background, is it more business? Is it more salary cap? Is it more scouting, coaching? Like where did they kind of make their bones? And this is somebody that made their bones as a scout and has done a really good job, I think, for the Texans, honestly, even though I'm ripping them for not drafted enough high level offensive players. I think that that part is fair. They've done a fairly decent job over the last several years. Liipfert's been around at least as a scout since 2018. Took over as assistant general manager, I think, last year. But basically, ever since Nick Caserio has been there or has been with the Texans, James Liipfert has kind of served as a bit of a right hand man, another one of those New England guys. So they work together in New England, and he's had a heavy hand in what they've done there. So James Liipfert possibly being paired with Matt Ryan sort of running the show there, but James Liipfert putting the team together. The Falcons got some pieces in a division that feels like it's going to be gettable, all that should be gettable all the time, because it's just not that great of a division. Can they figure out their quarterback situation? Like, it's a big year for Michael Penix as well. I'm assuming that's going to be their quarterback, but for how long? Because I don't feel like they got a whole lot of time to waste, considering how much they've put into that. Now, a new regime is going to get a fresh start, but they also got so many pieces there already that they should feel like they can hit the ground running. So I'm interested to see what ends up happening there. He does not have the job yet as of this recording, but Nick Caserio's right-hand man is a finalist for the Falcons job. So that is noteworthy. You also got a couple of assistants that are interviewing for coordinator jobs. You got Jerrod Johnson interviewing for the Eagles job. There was another one. It might have been the Titans job or no, was it the Dolphins job that ended up going to Slowick? I think that's the interesting one. So Johnson's interviewed for a couple of jobs. The most recent one, the Eagles. And I think Dino Vasso, the defensive backs coach, has interviewed for the Titans job. So, or at least they've requested an interview. I think that's what I saw. I think let's start with Johnson here. Here's my thing on Jerrod Johnson and this interview opportunity. I think it would be good for both Jerrod Johnson and CJ Stroud to start fresh. Their relationship is good, but I do wonder if Johnson's gotten the most that he's going to be able to get out of CJ Stroud. And also if it's time for Johnson to try a greater challenge like being a coordinator and calling plays. You know, you can't forget he's interviewed for the job before. He interviewed for the job to take over Slowick that he didn't get. Ultimately ended up going to Nick Caley. And I actually found that a little curious considering that Johnson did seem to be on track to become an offensive coordinator. Like this isn't his first interview. So keeping Jerrod Johnson around as the QB coach and bringing in a different coordinator, and so not elevating Johnson, that always felt a little bit odd to me, and I always wondered how Johnson exactly felt about that. But now to see that, you know, he's still in the running for OC positions and Stroud's kind of hit a snag in his development, to me it seems like the right time for the two of them to part ways. For Stroud to get a new voice in his ear or a different voice in his ear as a QB coach, and for Jerrod Johnson to do the thing that he clearly is trying to do, which is become an offensive coordinator, which more power to him as he should, you know, still in his late 30s and you know, a perfect opportunity there to parlay his success as a QB coach into an offensive coordinator. So that's what I think about Johnson and Stroud, at least as it pertains to like his status with the Texans. Now, Johnson was also a candidate for the Dolphins job, and that's the one that went to Slowick. Where yeah, that's how I read that. Jerrod Johnson either interviewed or was at least somebody that was being considered for the Dolphins job, for the offensive coordinator job in Miami, that ultimately went to Bobby Slowick. Now, Slowick was already there. His brother was there before he was. And Slowick got there this past year, as some kind of offensive assistant. He's going to get a second shot as a coordinator now in Miami. So from this perspective, I'm actually really anxious for Johnson to get a job somewhere as an offensive coordinator. If it's not with the Eagles, maybe it's somewhere else. But with the Texans keeping Nick Caley, we would get to watch if Johnson were to get a job now that Slowick has gotten a job. Okay, so Texans keep Nick Caley, Dolphins hire Bobby Slowick. Let's say Jerrod Johnson gets hired by the Eagles or gets hired by somebody. We'd get to watch and compare Caley versus Slowick versus Johnson and be able to decide what we like best, what we think makes the most sense for the team that Houston's put together, what makes the most sense for CJ Stroud, and sort of decide in one season really what we think would have been the right decision for the Texans in terms of the three guys that were in the building and either actual offensive coordinators or possibilities as offensive coordinators and play callers for the team. So that part is interesting to me. I'm hoping that Jerrod gets a job for his own sake, but also for just that observational part of it. Now, Dino Vasso has been around since the Cully era, and I think any of the coaches that have survived the multiple eras of coaching staffs deserve some level of recognition. You're talking about Dino Vasso, Danny Barrett, the running backs coach. You're talking about who else do we have? Frank Ross, the special teams coordinator. All of those guys, I think, are real solid to really good and above average coaches. The defensive backs are good players, as I've already talked about, but it is hard to look at their production and not give any credit to the guy that's been coaching that group all along. And again, that's why I mentioned that Vasso's been there through the regime since these guys were rookies all the way up to now, going back to, even Derek Stingley Jr. He's somebody that I think is easy to root for, been with the Eagles and the Chiefs before he got here. If anyone has earned an opportunity to be a defensive coordinator, I think it's Vasso. So, yeah. We'll also see. I've been looking for news about firings and guys who have been let go. I anticipate that there are going to be guys on the offensive side of the ball, even though, let's see, and I'm checking even now as I'm speaking. Even though we've got Nick Caley coming back, I am curious on all the guys that are not gonna make it back, because I don't think that this entire offensive staff is going to be the one that you see in 2026. I think some position coaches, Nick Haley is going to stick around. Cole Popovich is going to stick around. I really like Danny Barrett a lot. I anticipate that he would stick around. But there are going to be guys that perhaps get jobs elsewhere, and there are going to be guys that just, I think, flat out get let go. I'd be surprised if nobody does. So I'm keeping an eye out for that. I would say coaching changes aside, I am curious to see how this defense follows up a historic 2025 season. How many Pro Bowlers is this now? Will Anderson, Derek Stingley, Azeez Al-Shaair, Calen Bullock, Kamari Lassiter. That's 5. That didn't account for, and Daniil Hunter would be 6, even though he wasn't named to the Pro Bowl originally. He's an All-Pro, which is even better. So that's 6 either All-Pro or Pro Bowl guys. Only 11 guys out there. Jalen Petrie didn't get recognized, but everybody thinks he's of that caliber, or at least Pro Bowl caliber. There's 7. Okay, the interior guys are never going to get the shine that the guys on the outside get, and maybe deservedly so in terms of Pro Bowl, but just count 2 positions there, 8, 9. Okay, and so then you're talking about the other linebacker spot being Henry To'oTo'o, who maybe is not a Pro Bowler, but had an incredible season. I thought even like every time To'oTo'o had like a down moment or a negative moment, it seemed like he responded in kind, like responded with a hell of a game. So like there's your non-Pro Bowl spot, and then the other safety that's not Calen Bullock, which was a turnstile this past year. But the majority of the defense is all pro or Pro Bowl level. I think that's incredible. I'm curious to see how they follow up. What is their follow-up act to the 2025 season? Most of these guys are going to be back, and there's no reason to really feel like there's going to be much of a drop-off, other than to just say that it's really hard to be as good as they were this past season. Like it could be a lightning in a bottle type of situation for the Texans. Or this might be a whole era of Texans defense that really kind of leaves its mark in league history. They're going to have to do a lot more winning for that. And so when it comes to that, the question still remains, to the earlier point, what is the offense going to do? Can the offense carry its weight? From the team builder to the play caller to the quarterback. It's a fair question for all of them. Because unlike the defensive guys, they still have a lot to prove.